What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over several tips for controller players in Fortnite Chapter 5. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful or informative, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, and comment down below what controller you play on for Fortnite. Personally, I use a PS5 controller, and I do use the Evolve Jake style aim controller. There will be a link down in the description to check them out, and you can use code EvolveJake for a discount. I also have made several videos like this in the past, but not everybody watches every video. I know a lot of my viewers recently started playing the game in Chapter 5, and also some of these tips can just be nice to be refreshed if you haven't heard about it or thought about it in a while. The first thing I'm going to talk about is that you shouldn't blame your input method for everything. Controller and keyboard in Fortnite, they're not balanced the greatest, but they definitely can compete against one another, and there's been several controller players that have done well in even build competitive, and I feel like the gap is larger in build mode than it is zero build between keyboard and controller. So a lot of people have the mindset, or I'll see people come into my stream and be like, I play on controller, but I'm always losing to these keyboard players. Or when someone gets beamed, they'll just be like, oh, this guy must be playing on keyboard. I think that mindset is holding you back a lot. Even if controller is at a disadvantage, there's still things that you can do to, improve your play, and just using it as a crutch. I feel like a lot of players use their input method as a crutch, and that just doesn't do anything good for you. So try to get out of that mindset. If possible. The first thing we're going to talk about is going to be left stick aiming, and this is going to be moving your left stick, which is your movement stick. You move your character left and right to adjust your aim and make small minor adjustments when aiming. I think this is huge, and this is very important in every controller shooter I've ever played on my life, whether it's Fortnite, Call of Duty, Halo, Rainbow Six, Battlefield, but that game kind of had some mechanics that deterred it. Using the movement to make small adjustments by moving your character left and right, and doing that consistently and fluidly is just a sign. Not really the sign, but it can be an indicator that someone has a decent amount of experience playing on controller, because with the analog sticks, it can be hard to make small adjustments with just the right stick. Whereas if you move your character left and right, and if you try this in game, it doesn't make the largest adjustment, so you can use that to kind of make up for aim. Use this a lot with snipers. I also use this a lot close range with shotguns. And getting into the habit of doing this and aiming with both of your sticks, I think, is an essential skill if you want to improve on controller. One of the things that I notice if I'm watching somebody that kind of makes me think they're not as experienced is that they just always stand still when shooting. Not only is that going to make you an easier target for the opponent to hit, but you're leaving some potential aim improvements on the floor by not moving your character to adjust aim. Being able to aim fluidly with both sticks, I think, is a huge skill you want to develop if you want to get better at the game on controller. Another important thing you're going to want to do is to find a sensitivity that feels comfortable to hip fire with, because hip firing is going to be ideal in close range fights. Another thing that kind of makes me think someone is newer to the game is when they aim in way too much in close range fights. There might be times where you want to aim in or where it's beneficial, but if you and an opponent are both just kind of jumping around with the auto shotgun and you feel like you have to aim in to have any chance to hit them, not only is this going to make your character slower and more stationary, easier for the opponent to hit, but also your sensitivity is much lower when aimed in, so it's going to be easier for the opponent to use any movement to dodge your shots. And then also, the way the aim assist is in this game is aim assist is stronger when hip firing, if you're in close range. Obviously, if you're hip firing somebody across the map, that's not going to work, but in those close range shotgun fights, you're going to have more aim assist when hip firing, and moving your character is also something that does kind of improve your aim assist. So these tips kind of go hand in hand, where you want to be aiming with your movement and hip firing as much as possible in close range fights. There's a lot of people, when they're newer, feel like their hip fire sensitivity is way too fast to track people with, and then that's why they end up aiming in to kind of slow it down. But just in general, I think you want to break that habit. Whether you're a keyboard player or a controller player, you want to hip fire in close range fights. But I think especially if you're controller, because that's when you're going to have the most aim assist. Most players kind of play on an X and Y sensitivity somewhere between 40 and 60. How that feels will vary whether or not you're using expo or linear, which I'll probably have a different video linked down in the description below, which explains it better. It's kind of hard to get into that and not have this video be 20-30 minutes long. But like I said, 40 to 60 X and Y, you probably want to be somewhere within that range. Another thing that can really be affected by your settings is going to be your keybinds. These are going to be the buttons you press to make certain actions happen in game. And the default binds on controller are just not great if you hold the controller normally, because the jump button is going to be X or A if you play an Xbox controller. And so if you have to take your thumb off the right stick to hit that button, you're not going to be able to aim while jumping. And then also, I think the crouch button, I'm not sure what the default crouch button is, but same thing. You want to be able to jump and aim without taking your thumbs off the analog sticks. And you can kind of accomplish this by maybe making the sticks themselves jump and crouch. Or some people like to put jump on the bumpers, which was like an old button bind from Halo, where bumper jumper would be a thing. It gets kind of weird to do that in this game because that's one of your swap buttons. But either way, try to find some sort of keybinds that allow you to jump and crouch without taking your thumbs off the stick. That way you can actively be aiming while jumping, and you can actively be aiming while crouching. That's going to make your fighting a lot better. If you are using a default controller, default grip, this can be tough to accomplish. And that's one of the nice things about custom controllers, is that they have paddles on the back, or like pro controllers like the DualSense Edge or the Xbox Elite. They have paddles on the back. I only use one for sprint, but they have paddles on the back that allow you to map those buttons to the back of your controller. That way you won't have to take your thumbs off the stick. The reason why I only use one for sprint is because I play claw, and that is going to be where your index finger is on the AXBY or triangle, circle, X, square buttons at all times, and then you can hit all of those buttons with your index finger without taking your thumb off the analog stick. This is kind of outdated now. If I was talking to somebody that's just starting today, it probably is more reasonable to just get a pro controller or a custom controller. Back in the day, before those were a thing, if you wanted that advantage, you had to play claw, and I played claw since like 2008. I didn't really use custom controllers up until like last year or so, or I guess like late 2022 when I got sponsored by AIM. So just a quick recap of everything I just said. Think about your keybinds. Try to find some way to where you can jump and crouch without taking your thumbs off the analog stick. That way you can actively aim while do them. Playing claw is an option, but also getting a custom or pro controller is an option. You can kind of mess around with the binds to try to use, you know, a default controller non-claw and still get ideal binds. But in how games currently are, it's just hard to make that work. So unfortunately, that is like an aspect of the game that is like somewhat pay to win if you're a controller player and you don't want to play claw. Another thing that's going to be huge on controller, I think, is to use a consistent inventory setup, because the way you swap buttons, the way you swap weapons on controller is just not ideal. If you're using the default options, you'll hit the L1 or R1 buttons to swap weapons. If you have the quick swap setting on, you'll hit like a combination of buttons to swap weapons. But either way, you want to consistently use the same weapons in the same slot. That way you have the muscle memory for swapping. So for example, I run shotgun in slot 1. The reason why I do this is because I play both builds and zero builds, and the act of like going from pickaxe to builds back to weapon, which you'll do from taking somebody's wall, just defaults you to slot 1. So a lot of controller players have always just used shotgun slot 1. And then for me, everything else gets arranged around that. This season is a little different than how I typically do it because snipers are in the meta. But because of that, I run typically my AR in slot 2. That way I can shoot my shotgun and then swap to my AR easily. This isn't as important this season because the auto shotgun is meta, but if we ever get back to a pump meta, getting that swapping down perfect is nice. And then I also use my sniper in slot 3. That way I can snipe and then left swap to the once and then go back to my AR. That's just how I like doing it. But either way, the point stands. You just want to have consistently put the items next to what you're going to be using, you know, after using them. That way you can combo well, but also consistently putting them in the same spots every game. That way you build that muscle memory of swapping, I think is very important. And again, it's another thing that just like is a gap between someone who's not as experienced with the game and someone who's been playing a while, is like how easily it is for them to swap their weapons, because when you are starting out, the weapon swapping in this game is clunky. Another thing you can do to improve your aim in game is going to be pull down on your right stick to counter recoil. So when you shoot a gun like the Striker AR, the Nemesis AR, any of like the fully automatic weapons, they have recoil, and that is going to make your weapon kick up and up to the side sometimes. And then the way you want to counter this is just by pulling your analog stick in the opposite direction. So if the gun kicks straight up, if you pull your analog stick down a little bit while shooting, you're going to counter some of that recoil. Getting a feel for this is pretty important. The guns do have more recoil, I think, this season because there's also counter recoil attachments. But using something like the Mythic Striker AR, it doesn't have any of the counter recoil attachments like the muzzle brake or the foregrip. So using, like, being able to pull down and counter that recoil is going to make you much more effective with that weapon. And this is something that probably sounds super basic if you've been playing shooters on controller all your life, but you'd be surprised how many people I tell this to, and then they're like, I don't know why I didn't think of that before. Basically, pull your right stick in the opposite direction of the recoil to counteract the recoil a bit. You want to avoid fighting around things that remove aim assist, like bushes. This is a big one because a lot of players will play in and around bushes, and this is one spot where keyboard players have a huge advantage over controller because there is no aim assist when you're in the bush. Or when you're fighting somebody in the bush. Like if you're looking at the bush, you won't get aim assist on the person in it. And if you're in the bush, you also won't get aim assist on anybody you look at. This is so you can't just like drag your aim over bushes and find the person in it easily. But either way, just keep this in mind. If you're going to push somebody in a bush, you probably want to avoid doing that if you're a controller player. There definitely still will be times where I push people in bushes, but it's going to be when I know I have them incredibly weak. And I'm going into the fight knowing, like, hey, I'm not going to have aim assist in this fight. And then I still make that decision otherwise. I still make that decision to do it. But I think just going into it knowing I won't have aim assist is huge. If you get caught off guard by the fact that you don't have aim assist, that's not going to be ideal. Using cars to, like, run the bushes over can be a good way to, like, deal with this. But again, you just don't want to be fighting in bushes if you're a controller player, unless it's like a very specific situation where you already have the person weak and you are aware going into it and you've chosen to do it anyways. Crosshair placement is another huge skill regardless of input, but I think it is huge for controller as well. This is just keeping your crosshair where you expect opponents to be and, like, where they actually will be. So, like, you want to keep it like upper torso region if you're going to be fighting in close range or if you're clearing a building. One thing that a lot of newer players do is they'll kind of just naturally look at the ground when they're moving around the map or when they're, like, clearing a building. I don't know why this is a thing in many other games as well, but people look at the ground, and this makes it to where you have to make a much larger adjustment when it actually comes to aiming. And that's going to, you know, make that fight a little bit harder for you. So just having good, consistent crosshair placement where you're kind of keeping it at, like, torso or upper torso level of where your opponents will be, and you're proactively putting it where you expect people to be, is going to make it to where you don't have to adjust as much when the fight breaks out. That's going to make it easier for you to consistently land shots. And this is something that's very simple. I think a lot of people just kind of look at the ground like somewhat subconsciously, or they don't really think about it. And once you just kind of actively think about this a little bit, I think you'll get a lot better at it. Another thing you might want to do if you're a controller player is turn vibration off in the settings. Vibration makes it to where your controller shakes when you, like, shoot your guns or when you're getting shot maybe. I haven't played with vibration since, like, COD 4, so like 2008 or so. If you're playing a multiplayer shooter and you're concerned with the outcome of the game and you want to play better, which, you know, if you're making it to this point in the video, that's probably you, you know, turn vibration off. There's no reason to have your controller shaking a bunch, and most, like, pro or, like, serious controller players play with vibration off. And then the final thing we're going to talk about is going to be the dead zone setting. This is in the sensitivity options. It's, like, at the bottom. And dead zones are how much you move your analog stick before the game starts to register any input. And the reason why this is a setting is because, like, controllers are mass produced and sometimes they'll have stick drift. But the default option of dead zones makes the controllers not as reactive as they would be otherwise. A general rule of thumb is that you would want to have these as low as possible to the point where you don't get stick drift. And what stick drift is when the game just moves on its own without you touching the stick. Once you get stick drift, you want to turn it up a little bit to the point where you're not getting stick drift anymore. And this is just going to make your controllers as fluid as possible, I guess would be a way to say it. It's going to make it easier for you to react to things and make small adjustments and have more control over your aim. Most players are kind of in the 8 to 12% range. That's kind of like an ideal spot. But like I said, if you have an older controller that's a little bit worn in, that might, you know, be a little different for you. You might have to have it a little higher, but chances are you can go lower than what the default is without getting stick drift. Again, 8 to 12 is probably where you want to be. It might feel like too loose at first, but once you get used to it, it's better in the long run. And again, this is a setting that most kind of like serious or pro or just, you know, good controller players do change to try to get lower dead zones. It's just something that a lot of people don't think about or don't understand off the get-go, and then they just kind of leave it as is when initially setting up their settings. But that is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys found this helpful, informative, interesting. As always, if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, comment down below what controller you play with, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.